feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of The Shrimp Tank. I'm your co-host, Ted Jenkin, here with my co-host, Lee Heisman, and our guest, Stæven Frey. I'll bring him in just a second. Every week, we bring you some of the brightest and best CEOs and founders in and around the city of Atlanta and across the United States. The Shrimp Tank is growing. We're in some 14 cities right now. There are a lot of people, they just love hearing the stories of how entrepreneurs started their businesses, how they're growing them, how they're running them, how they've exited or how they plan to exit those businesses. This is what's on the mind of people. In fact, 1 out of 2 Americans right now have some sort of side hustle. So de facto, you probably are watching and you have a business or you're growing a business. This is where we get that collision of street smarts and book smarts. We wrap it all into one. And that's what we do on the Shrimp Tank. Of course, if you're watching for the first time, make sure that you check out our YouTube channel at shrimptankpodcast.com. We've got thousands of followers on that YouTube channel. Simply hit the subscribe button. That way you get all of the great information. If you click that notifications bell, it'll let you know every time that we put up a new video. And you can always get the podcast that we've done some 400, 500 podcasts right here in Atlanta. You can simply go to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or anywhere that you can download podcasts. We have tons of people going at this every month. I'm excited, Lee, today because we literally love brands. We know that. We see all kinds of brands are out there, but we have the branding expert today. He's not only the chief brand scientist, I love that at all, but Stæven, I love this. He's the adorkable. I like that. I wonder if we could steal that word from him, right? Founder and chief brand scientist at Quantum Branding. He helps brands become authentic and memorable category leaders, which is what you want to do in your city, your state, or across the United States through the power of something he's trademarked, folks call brand science. And I do believe there's a science in this. It's the core of what fuels a successful brand growth, sales, and marketing. So Stæven, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Lee and Ted, and thanks, Shrimp Tank listeners. Excited to share with you what we're going to talk about today.
So listen, I want to start off this question because I spent half my career in corporate America. I spent half my career owning my own companies. And I remember sitting in a session one time, hearing the chief marketing officer of American Express, and they were talking about this concept called a love mark. And this idea of a love mark is that people can't always exactly tell you what they love about a brand so much, but they fall in love with it so much that it's basically the main reason that they do business. So why is a brand so important if you're building a business?
Sure. So thanks for bringing up that example of Love Mark. Love Mark, that's a great book. And you nailed it. It was that concept that was intended to replace the idea of brands was a love mark. So that's Kevin Roberts, the CEO of Saatchi & Saatchi. So
Saatchi & Saatchi did that.
Look at this guy. He's rolling in here with the intel. Back to your question, why as a business owner, why as a brand leader, why as a founder of a startup or 30K or 30 million, why is your brand important? The really interesting question is really how humans are wired. So marketing is the activity that says, hey, do business with me. So back in the day, you used to, barter cheese for some wheat, and we used to barter, and there would be like a door or a sign out by the door that said, this is the blacksmith. Oh, this is, and people would barter. And so marketing started as a functional identifier of who to do business with. Well, we don't trade cheese and wheat and common goods. We live in a digital, worldwide, global economy. You don't make cell phones. I don't make cars. So who do I know, or whom do I know who to do business with? So that's where branding comes in. So marketing says, hey, do business with me. Branding are those mnemonic devices within the marketing that you remember that are distinct, whether that's a color, a shape, a story, the package. There's a whole sensory wheel of sensory assets that it could be. Sometimes it's a tagline, but word, shape, color, story, sound, music, character, any of those sensory-based assets from our memories help us remember those brands. So the more distinct and famous your brand assets are, the more people are going to think of you. So it comes down to actually how humans are wired we think in systems one and system two. And if you're familiar with the book, maybe the listeners are as well. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, um, Nobel Prize psychologist. And he talks about how the majority of our life is wired with system one, which is on autopilot. And that autopilot is why you can talk to your friend, you can drive in the car, you can do things. Then system two is like calculating 15 times 37 or complicated hypothetical scenarios. So basically, how people are wired, we are making sense of our world with our brains and making sense with these senses. And so we're remembering memories based on our senses. So brands are the gateway for people to remember you. And that took a long kind of like rabbit trail path. And it started with it's how people are wired. And then we had to talk about marketing for a second, but we came back. It's how people are wired. People are wired to remember distinctive memories about things, and they use their senses. And branding is the way that we tap into that.
And Staeven, for listeners out there, and it's a really good point, and I saw you brought this up, and I want to bring this up as well, is, when we have listeners right now listening or watching our YouTube, and they say, well, I already have a brand. Why should I listen to the rest of this podcast right now? Why should I listen to Steve's information if they already have a brand?
Great question. So you may have a brand mark. You may have the word itself of your brand. You may have a name and it was vetted by your lawyer. But here's the interesting thing. The average business owner typically only has 3 to 5 assets. Their brand mark, their name, a color, maybe a tagline, and a photo of a product or something to use. The average successful brand on the national or international level has anywhere from 100 to 150. Coca-Cola has 170 distinctive brand assets. Everything from jingles to always Coca-Cola. They just made the shift from the black Coke Zero to the red Coke Zero with the black lettering, because they built a distinctive memory structure that said, hey, black, no sugar or zero sugar. So then they updated it and they refreshed it. So they have all these assets from polar bears to Santa Claus to open happiness. And so they have saturated because they're on an authority, they're all up here. They're a brand authority. And this is where you want to get to. So they have 150 plus assets. If you want to go launch, Ted and Lee Cola, you're going to have to introduce your brand. You're going to have to start at the bottom. And those 3 to 5 assets that you have can't really compete against the 100, 150 commercially designed Fortune 500 assets that your competitors have. So it really comes down to, you want to invest strategically into your brand and have a plan for what are you investing in? What assets are you testing? How do you know which assets are good? And you may have a very, very great brand mark. Your name may be amazing, but that's just like 1, 2, 3 things when there's a whole slew, a whole memory bank that your competitors are out there developing and using. So we definitely want you to keep listening to this episode.
Yeah, when you look at businesses that are out there, I find that a lot of business owners that we've interviewed on the podcast and ones that Lee and I know personally, when they talk about this overarching term of marketing, there's the marketing or the dollars that they look at that will generate instantaneous leads. And then there's the marketing that should be put towards branding, which many businesses do not put money towards branding. Do you have any sense, like on a marketing budget, about how much of a dollar should go towards branding and how much should go to direct ROI, and how you convince an owner that this could take a long time, but it'll be worth it in the long term?
Sure. Great question. So it's interesting. When I think of this question, I often think of De Beers and the people that came up with the concept of the wedding ring. And they said it's 8 months' salary. And that's just honestly an arbitrary term that culturally we took on. I've heard other agencies say, 20% of your overall annual
20%.
budget.
Well, no, actually, guys, to be honest, Michael Scott from the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company was 3 years of his salary. And he bought the ridiculous ring, if you guys remember. And someone said, it's actually supposed to be 3 months, Michael, but he spent 3 years salary. So I agree with you. Sorry.
Thank you for that. So it's interesting. So there's what kind of like people say, and then there's the reality. Day in and day out, working with startups that start, with just strap up, bootstrap cash to small incubators to growing companies. On average, what I'm actually seeing people spend on branding is really part of their marketing budget. And in reality, there's kind of that faux pas. Oh, it's 8 months. Well, it's kind of like diamonds. People say it's 8 to 10%. If you are spending 8 to 10% on your marketing, you are an amazing company, and I want to meet you. And that's not reality. What I find is most companies are struggling to spend 2 or 3% on marketing.
Right.
Once they've gotten to maybe the 5 to 10 to 25 million, then they feel like, oh, I can breathe a little bit and then start spending on marketing. And what actually, it's one of those interesting things that if you realize that it's important in the beginning, you'll start making it a priority in the beginning. So it's kind of like working out or something else that's important in your day or your week. You plan that at the beginning so that it's always a consistent part. So in reality, I see a lot of brands, regardless of size, from 100K to 100 million, spending about 2 to 3% on branding alone if they're really serious about investing, because at the end of the day, they're struggling even to spend 4 or 5%. So then all of a sudden, someone's going to come in and take, the majority of their marketing budget away just for branding, and then everyone gets possessive. So it really is a strategic decision. You do need to identify, why are we investing? What are the goals? And the goals ultimately for all marketing, it's so easy to get caught up in metrics and technology and leads and lagging and leading indicators and all these things that a marketing person's supposed to do. And at the end of the day, really what marketing professionals and senior brand leaders need to be concerned with is one thing. Marketing exists to increase your mental or physical availability. Every activity you do, any activity that you do, whether it's sales, whether it's trade shows, whether it's billboards, however you want to slice it up, any activity that you do is meant to increase the top of mindness, the mental availability of the brand, and the physical availability of the brand. So you want to be top of mind. You want to have all those assets and those associations so that when people are running on autopilot, you're already primed in that decision-making process. So when it does become time, they're like, oh, I'm thirsty. Oh, 99 cents. I'll get a Coke. Like it's autopilot. Now, again, system 2 in our thinking, we're obviously going to talk to Lee, or we're going to talk to Ted, and we're going to sit down and I'm going to interview them, or we're going to work through a proposal. Yes, that's system 2 that exists. But that pathway is laid by who do you talk to? Who do you know? Who is top of mind? Who do you recommend? And that's where we get networking. And that's really the whole concept of networking, is being top of mind and leveraging your network. So the whole goal is be top of mind, but then you've got to be available for people to purchase you. It's got to be easy. Do people notice you? Are they attracted to what you do? Do they get what you do? Oh, baskets for hamsters. Awesome. Chocolate chip pancake cookies. Oh, like it's got to be simple. Whatever your brand is, it's got to be simple for them to get, because system 1 is all about easy, uncomplicated, make it simple for me to understand. And so when your brand is easy to understand and it's easy to purchase, that's really the whole purpose of marketing. And any business has.
So Stephen, I think for our audience,
even working with clients, same thing.
For our audience, I think it would be kind of cool to break this down for them and say, look, if you're starting a business, or you're at the early stages of starting a business, where do you start with this stuff? Do you start, Stephen, by saying, this is my ideal customer, his name is Charlie Concrete, and I'm going to sell him some concrete? Because I think for a lot of people that don't outsource this stuff, it's probably pretty hard for the average person in a business to think about, like, what do I want my brand to be? So where does somebody start with this?
Sure. So there's a lot of different places you can start. Most people are going to actually go to and talk to a marketing company because they think they solve these things. And then what they typically find is that company or agency is going to give them, a proposal that's based on their product, their prices, and their profit. It's actually not based on their business. So some of the factors that you really want to look at are actually some of the factors that we've got a program called Brandpreneur. And one of the things we teach in there is the 5 rings of insight. And so this is something that we've identified. It's the best way to build a persona. And a persona is the most human portrait possible. And the goal of the 5 rings of insight is to find out what are their decision-making process? What is their success criteria? What are the things that are holding them back? So when you're building out your assets, when you're building out your brand is really connected to the idea of what you do for them. And that's actually the first places you need to start is you need to understand what are you really doing and for whom are you doing it for? And if we think of Kodak, for example, if Kodak just stayed in the idea that we do film, they would be bankrupt. And in fact, they did file bankruptcy. But when they got the idea that, oh, idea-based business, we help people capture memories, then it's about the carousel, then it's about digital images, then it's about prints, then it's about ways to make capturing memories fun. So in our Brandpreneur program is actually a 10-week course for senior brand leaders. And I was going to save this till the end, but we walk through an empirical understanding of brand science and how brands grow. And along that journey, we talk about rooting your business in an idea-based business first and foremost, because that's really where it starts. And that's actually my personal philosophy that people are the most important, ideas are the most powerful, and brands connect the two. So if you're connected to an idea of what you do, even if it's decorative concrete, even if it's industrial concrete, even if it's really boring elevator shaft cinder block, regardless, what are you helping people do? We're helping people have beautiful landscapes for their home. We're helping them have safety and security when the construction company comes. People don't ever want to have to think about the cinder blocks that this elevator is in. They just need it to work. So those ideas that are actually the root of your business, that's really where you start. So you start first with who you are, what you do, and why it matters, and rooting that in the idea. And then from there, you can start to build out the language of your customer persona, and really using language that reflects to them. And so when people go to your website, they are not looking for you, they're looking for themselves. Oh, does Lee understand me? Does Ted understand me? Oh, and so it's a reflection back, and you're using literally the words. If I was going to interview you for a project, I would say, Lee, tell me about what are you looking to do? What's kind of the perceived, like what's in your way? Like and I would use that language that I get from you, and I'm gathering this all the time. So it's not like I just go down and I sit down and say, hey guys, I need to do an interview. You're always talking to your customers. So this is where you like write things down like, ooh, Ted said he feels stuck. He feels stuck and he is overwhelmed. Are you stuck and feel overwhelmed? Ted goes to my website. Oh my gosh, Stæven, your website's amazing. Because I listened to what he was saying his experience was. So the goal is to really root and understand, why are you here? What are you doing? Root that in an idea. The more you can communicate that in everything you do, the better off you're going to be. So that's
Stæven,
step one.
And it's important for our listeners. I want to just emphasize to provide background here. You've worked with clients as large as Cracker Barrel, Target, Costco, Michael's, many, many more. I have to ask this question because you're providing a ton of information, but a lot of listeners out there, either we call them the entrepreneurs, people that want to be an entrepreneur, or current entrepreneurs that are listening to the show. As I said, they may think it sounds so easy the way that you're talking about this. Like, oh, sure, it's so easy for Stæven. It's not even a problem. But Stæven, that's not true. You're dealing with larger companies. You don't have to say names. What are some of the things where you've seen some major brands or even aspiring companies where they started making mistakes? I want to get the dirt, Stæven. Sure. What kind of mistakes?
So here's the interesting thing. The amount of money that a company makes does not mean how smart the people are. And very successful humans can also make mistakes and on bigger levels. And so it's interesting, I worked with a large mattress manufacturing company. And there was times where working where that client was challenging The way that they thought was based on the economy, and there was a lot of political influences of, we do better when this party is doing better, and all. It's like just at the end of the day, a lot of what our businesses are reflections of who we are, and so it doesn't matter how much money you make. Those businesses are still making mistakes too. Now they have more people to hold them accountable and catch those mistakes before it gets out the door. So the first one we actually talked about is you're starting, you're a startpreneur, and you're, or a wantpreneur, you want to start your company. Obviously there's some first things that you need to do that are a little bit more difficult because you don't have a legal team. You need to go and get your name vetted by the state and all these things to make sure that you're on the right path. So you need to find those right resources. Really, the first one is unseen is unsold. If
I
people
like
don't
that, Ted.
see you,
That's a
they can't
t-shirt.
buy you.
Unseen is unsold.
Unseen is unsold. I'm going to steal that, Stephen.
Sure, and that's something I worked with. When I was working with Mars, we came up with is unseen is unsold. So seen equals sold. And so there's several, I love to geek out about studies. And there's one where a guy dressed up as a gorilla, and the people are watching this video of people in white t-shirts, and they're tossing, how many times do the people in the white shirt pass the ball? A gorilla walks by and nobody notices. And so it's an attention bias. Like we are focused over here, and so we miss all the other things. And that's a really good example of when we are really, really focused on our brand and our business, we're trying to do it all ourselves, and sometimes we miss some things. So regardless of whether you're, 100K or 100 million, having someone or having a framework, which is why I love brand science. Brand science shows us that there are metrics for you to build, your brand from the bottom up. So from traction, growth to scale to authority. And all along the way, there's different paths of, oh, do you have a brand platform? What about your people? What about your operations? What about your frontline, personnel, whether that's sales or customer service? And so you can't build a pyramid from the top down, and it's a four-sided thing. So many of our business models fail when they're one-dimensional. We also don't think in three dimensions. So it's easier to look at four triangles and say, oh, these make a pyramid, but they all need to go up at the same time. So oftentimes the biggest mistake is people are trying to grow and scale their business, but they're missing their brand platform. They're missing the core tenets of who they are and how they communicate, so that there isn't that constant thread of idea sewn through everything they do. So then, sales department is upset because they don't have materials that they feel supported in. And then the sales leaders aren't happy because they're not achieving their numbers and marketing. And it's really easy to get off because we don't have a unifying core message that everybody understands.
So Stephen, let's go back and talk about, I want to talk about two things in here so we don't miss this. I'm starting a business and I'm thinking about getting everything up and running. How do I know, number one, what colors to pick? You mentioned the color palette and, different colors represent different things, but more importantly, I've always been a big believer that you do need some sort of tagline. I know sometimes some companies do it in 3 words and 3 dots. Sometimes people come up with a little snappy saying, but I've always felt it is very important. Lee and I have got a small concrete business, and you might like this. We call it one pour, no more. That's it. And it rolls off of people's tongues. We tell them, I don't know what the other guys do. We do. But isn't that important? Because people have to have recognition, and they may not always remember the name of your company, but they may remember the slogan.
Sure. So that's just a great example of, telling a story. The more details in the story, the more you're going to remember it. Right. And so your brand, when you have a tagline, that's one more additional asset. It's easier to remember someone that has a color and a tagline and a name brand than someone who just has one of those things. Right. So the more of those, and I call them distinctive brand assets or DBAs. We don't say logo, we start saying brand mark. And then we realize that it's not just about the brand mark. It's not about your logo. It's about all of these things in a suite. And the more of them you have, the easier it is for people to remember you by. So having that tagline, And so color gets really tricky. You mentioned color. Color is an interesting thing. And I like to say there's a principle, and I love to mix metaphors. It's actually one of my favorite things. You guys mix concrete, and I mix metaphors. But color, people think there's a psychology to color that overarches everything, and it's actually cultural and it's contextual. So yellow doesn't mean happiness. It means stained teeth when we're talking about the dental industry. Red doesn't mean caffeine. It may mean blood when you're talking about first aid and medical things. So depending on the context of the category, you may have different cultural and contextual understanding of what those colors mean. A great example is people in the US predominantly wear black during grieving. In Asian cultures, such as Japan, if I'm not mistaken, they wear white. Even if you think of, the recent Black Panther movie, they celebrated life and they're all wearing white. And so color is cultural and it's contextual. And so to the mixed metaphor, it's like a baseball diamond. Everything you need to do is based on a set of category rules. So if we're walking down the cookie aisle and say you're interested in a cookie, the first thing you need to do is, what are the cues? Crunchy, crispy, chocolatey, caramel, strawberry, wafer. So there's category cues that your customers are looking for. And if we're mixing our metaphors, which we are, this is like first base. So in your category, there's a first base, which is the category cues for the customer. Then there's also the industry. So we're walking down the cookie aisle, and the cookies we're looking at, some are in trays, some are in parchment paper and fancy, some are shrink wrapped, some have the little foil lid sticks back down. And there's category norms of how you deliver what you do, packaging norms, or even just service norms. Like if you're a legal professional, there's legal norms. Like there's the way you deliver your product or service. So if we understand what the foul lines are, what our competition does is they hit the ball where they want to hit the ball. Like, because we have this whole field of play. Oh, dirt cheap sugar wafers, bottom shelf, $1.99. Bougie high-end Tate's crispy cookies, parchment top shelf. So that's a home run if that's what you're looking for. So then when we go to hit the ball, we want to choose a color. Now, blue doesn't mean sandwich cookie exclusively, but blue plus the word Oreo plus Nabisco and all their assets together means sandwich cookie. So then we find that products are, in fact, near knockoffs of each other, using just these subtle differences. I know we're talking about cookies, but the best example, honestly, is a toilet paper. You got packs that are this wide, this tall, it's red, it's yellow, it's blue, there's a soft fuzzy animal or baby on it, and there's bad math in the corner that says how many rolls this should be, but I don't understand. So every category has their own norms like this. So the goal is we need to find what is our distinct combination of, one pour, no more. That's a tagline. Here's our color. Everyone else predominantly uses blue. Maybe we'll use a lighter color blue, or maybe we'll use our secondary color as blue and our primary color is pink, like bright T-Mobile pink, because that's really distinct, but it fits with that color palette. Sometimes you can choose assets that are kind of triangulated and relate to the other assets in the category, or you can choose ones that are completely like those ones and then create other assets that are more distinct. So within every category, there's kind of this trade dress. Certain industries tend to be more this, other industries tend to be more that. I use product examples like in the grocery store and cookies and shampoo and toilet paper, even though I know the people that we're talking to aren't necessarily have shampoo company. Why? Because these are just tangible examples that we're like, that makes that concept understandable. I get it. So we know that if you're in the shampoo aisle, you don't use green. That's Garnier Fructis. But you're not going to use blue because that's Suave for men. Right. And it's the same in your category. Your category is going to have those norms. So having somebody help do the research to identify, what are the norms? What is the IP that is protected? I can't use that color red because that's shrimp tank red. You don't want to use certain colors because you don't want your customers to think of the competition. You want them to think of your.
Hey,
of
Lee,
you.
I went to a golf tournament here because marijuana is becoming legal in a lot of places, and it wasn't Smokey the Bear; it was Smokey the Blunt.
I see, and it's memorable. So think about that, Stephen. Ted remembered that. Guys, listen, what's most important is for the Zoom interviews, and Stephen, we've been doing this again in excess of 1,300, 1,400 episodes. I lost count over our 15 studios across the country. When we do our Zoom, the worst part is we don't get to be in front of Stephen, and we only have it 30 minutes, guys, and our 30 minutes is up and our time is 5 and we're having fun. The best news is, Ted, Stephen is out of Nashville. So, Stephen, we need to get you into the studio for at least an hour episode because the content and what you're providing us, we could go down this rabbit hole for an hour to an hour and a half. But just to wrap us up, guys, real quick, and again, Stephen, when you're in town, you need to come in. I need to know how listeners that are listening and want to learn more about you because your breadth and depth and of your knowledge in the branding and marketing space. I could sit and listen to you for 3 hours and I would still feel like I've just learned the tip of the iceberg. How?
Oh, thank you.
It's true. How do people get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Sure. So you can check us out. Our website is Quantum, Quantum, branding.agency. And you can even find out more about quantumbranding.agency. And you can actually find out more about Brandpreneur on there. I mentioned that earlier. And that's actually the 10-week program and workshop for senior brand leaders. And that's actually the first starting point. If you're interested in learning more about getting an empirical understanding of brand science, how brands grow, and you'll walk away with an evidence-based assessment of your brand, knowing what to work on, how to work on your brand, and then you'll also walk away with an actionable brand plan, which is your master guide for success. So this ensures that you know how to grow and scale your business according to brand science. And again, you can find more about that program and what we do at Quantum at quantumbranding.agency.
Lee, I have to know this before we wrap up the podcast because, I mean, his background is fascinating. But when you and I grew up, there was a famous movie called The Jerk. You remember that movie?
Of course, Steve Martin.
And Naven Johnson is outside of the gas cans when he's filling up the gas tank. And basically the guy is shooting through the gas cans and he says, he hates those cans. He hates those cans. And I need to know, why does Stephen hate condiments? I want to know why you hate condiments. No ketchup, no mustard, no Chick-fil-A sauce, no nothing.
So I think it started out, my mother was allergic to vinegar. And so it would, cause negative effects for her health, and her throat would swell up. But I tease that, I hate Mean Girls and condiments because they just, and an empty coffee cup. I really do. Just, I don't like squished up, pickled stuff. Maybe it's a texture thing. Maybe it's just me being overprotective still of my mom. I'm not sure. But I'm a purist. Give me a cheeseburger plain from Burger King. Now, if I went to a fancy burger place, yes, and it had a great, great spread of lettuce and tomato and bacon, and maybe there's a Gruyere sauce. Yes, put that on there. But I'm kind of a purist. I want to taste the food, not the vinegary vegetables. And
Ted, that's a really fair answer. Ted, I have to admit, I don't disagree with Stephen.
It's like going to a restaurant and then asking the chef, do you have ketchup? And they're like, no, ketchup does not go on this $190
Would you like
meal.
you like the ketchup or the A1 sauce for the steak? You might be escorted out of a night restaurant. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on today. Ted, again, words of wisdom.
Thanks for listening, y'all.
Stephen, listen, Nashville is not far away from us. When you make a plan, we expect you to come to our studio. Let us know in advance.
I look forward to it.
Guys, ladies and gentlemen, listening to this, please go back and check out all of our YouTube videos in the past. You can obviously download and listen to us on iTunes, all of the form, of course, Stitcher, SoundCloud, on iHeartRadio. We are a top 3 entrepreneur podcast across the entire country. And check out all of our other hosts, guys. Our Boca Raton host, Jason Hill, has some amazing guests recently. Had one of the people, Ted, I'm not going to give it away. He recently had a Shark Tank guest on. I'm going to say go to his last episode and you'll see who that is, guys. Thank you so much for listening to Shrimp Tank again. And that's the end of your program. Thank you.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.